And we will have closed captioning today, so everyone is aware. And we're going to get started. Thank you everyone for being here. We really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I know there's a lot of different programs going around, so we really appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you to Seattle Design Festival for including us, and we've been partners now for years, and this year we are so grateful to be included and have this program. So thank you to Seattle Design Festival. Thank you audience for being here. A couple of housekeeping facts. We will hold Q&A at the very end of the event. So if you can hold your questions until the end, we'll be using the Q&A function in Zoom and kick it off at the very end. We'll let you know when it's time for that. If you're new to Substantial or have not met Substantial, we are a digital innovation firm, digital innovation and build firm. We are located in Seattle, Washington, and we're a group of about 50 strategists, designers, and practitioners in development. We build digital products for Fortune 500 startups and work a lot in the nonprofit and foundation space. Education is an area that we hold close to our hearts, and we're excited to share more about that work today. We have Sheryl with us today, who is Substantial's VP of Strategy, and we're so excited to talk about this topic of education and thinking about the past and the future. We also have Jenna with us, who is in conversation with Sheryl and is the Director of Education at USC Shoah Foundation. And I will give an introduction and some context to who USC Shoah Foundation is and some of the work that they have been doing. If you give me just a moment here, I am going to share a testimony from USC Shoah Foundation. One moment as I'm getting the screen ready. Sheryl, do you have anything to add?
I don't before we get started. Yeah, let's share the video first and then we'll get started after that.
Sounds good. Video is cued. You may want to adjust your volume. And here is the testimony from USC Shoah Foundation.
We should try to understand each other. We should try to live with each other, accommodate each other as much as we can. Don't be a boss. Don't be bossy, and especially don't hurt each other. And if somebody speak to you, listen. But if you don't believe what they're saying, don't be afraid to say so. I do. I do it on my customers.
And then I know you have been speaking out for a long time about your experiences,
Yes.
And now again here for the Shoah Foundation. Is there a special message you would like to pass on to future generations?
At the end of my presentation for children, I always say, don't hate. Don't ever hate each other. It starts by hating. Try to understand each other. And if you cannot love each other, at least respect each other.
I will now pass the mic over to Sheryl and Jenna in conversation about our work together.
Thanks, Sarah. We appreciate it. Before I get started, just because I know we are talking about the importance of history and place, I wanted to acknowledge where Substantial's offices are on the historic land of the Duwamish people, and we're really grateful for the place where we're able to be. So Jenna, it's like anytime I hear the testimony from the USC Shoah Foundation, it's just incredible, just like the emotional resonance. And I think what I want to do is back up a little. I'd like to hear a little bit about yourself and your position there and how you came to be at the Shoah Foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. The Holocaust survivor, Conrad Ruud, who we were just listening to, is one of 55,000 survivors and witnesses to genocide that are in our archive at the Shoah Foundation. And I've been working with the Shoah Foundation for 9 years now, and I came really because of the power of these stories. I think back to the first time I read a Holocaust survivor memoir in 6th grade and read it cover to cover, and the power of Alicia Appelman-German's words that she had so bravely shared in her life story. And then her visit to my 6th grade classroom to talk about her experiences really left a powerful mark on me. I was driven to really want to understand how story and learning about the past can be relevant for audiences of all varieties, whether museum audiences, classrooms, general public. There's just something powerful about a story. And I think the archive and having this amazing resource of voices to bear witness to these really terrible moments in history, but also really powerful stories of resilience and courage and joy in life before these moments of atrocity, and joy and life afterwards. There's something really powerful about that. And to me, being able to be in an organization that values the history, I'm a historian by training, but I always was very drawn to the notion of how can we take history and bring it outside of the textbooks, and how can we make it engaging and interesting for the lay audience, to students who may be over it and not want to learn about something that happened in the past, and how is that even relevant. I love the way that we're constantly pushing the envelope and trying to see how we can continue to make these stories of the past, whether it's about the Holocaust, the Armenian genocide, the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda, the Cambodian genocide. Our collections have continued to increase over the last decade, and these stories are so important and valued and valuable for education. And being able to work with an organization like Substantial that is able to take all of these ideas in our head and be able to bring something really beautiful into the world was really an exciting opportunity for us to explore, and excited to talk more about that today.
Great. Yes. So the Shoah Foundation has been collecting testimony for a long time. 55,000. I was just floored by that figure. You just said it. The amount of work that you all have done is incredible. And so my question is, like, knowing that it's your mission to develop empathy, understanding, and respect through testimony, it's interesting that we've partnered together to create kind of digital products, which aren't always associated with those concepts. And so can you tell us a little bit about the beginnings of IWalk, which is the app we partnered on together, and Shoah Foundation's vision for it?
Absolutely. When taking the testimonies, we had some very kind of simple and complex approaches to the way an interview would unfold. It's a life story. We wanted to hear about life before these moments of atrocity, life during, of course, and then life after. And so much of that human experience is a journey. And so when individuals are telling their story, the elements of place factors in so deeply into all of these stories. And so what we were finding as we're building all sorts of educational resources, primarily through our educational website, Eyewitness, we also were finding that in the heart of all of these stories, place plays such a central role. And some of my amazing colleagues based in Budapest started, and this is probably back in 2013, 2014, were loading testimonies onto iPads and syncing it with iTunes and trying to, individually load iPads and taking a group of teachers out into the field and saying, hey, we're here to teach you how you can teach with testimony. And when we have history all around us, especially in such an amazing, rich, beautiful city like Budapest, the testimonies just brought to life the stories and the history that was all around these teachers and students, but maybe as they walked to school every day, didn't pause to think about what had happened, in 1944 in this part of town. And in other places. So it really just went from, okay, we're going to load some testimonies onto an iPad and get out there and listen and see what the power of bringing together the testimonies with the place. And then seeing that the teachers were so enthralled with the idea of bridging that together. And then they wanted to start bringing their students out for field trips, and they wanted to start building local IWalks for their hometown, because they're like, oh, I can search the archive and I can find that there are, 25 survivors talking about this one corner in my hometown and what happened there. They would start building their own resources based around that, which for us was amazing to be able to see that they are so impacted by not only the professional development experience of learning how to teach with testimony, but then also being empowered to want to take that on and actually build resources for their own classroom. And so we kind of, went from there, and it went, let's build a small, quick little prototype, see what we can do. Does it really work as an app? Yes, it works. Let's do evaluation. Let's have some evidence to show that we're getting teachers and students out, exploring space, finding value in bridging the place and the story, and having students reflect on their experiences and ask questions and answer questions and have dialogue amongst each other. And so once we had enough evidence that, yeah, this is a really powerful tool, we knew we needed to bring this out into the world in a very thoughtful way, with all sorts of considerations around pedagogy and best practices in design to really ensure that we're putting the care into the testimonies that we do in terms of preservation and access. We wanted to make sure that that would be reflected in an app that we would be putting out to the world.
That's really incredible. It's like I love that you listened to and understood what teachers were already doing. And having worked on several education projects, I am always struck by how teacher hacks are often like the source of so much, inspiring content and methods to kind of help create great student experiences. So that's amazing that it was kind of born of that, and then you kind of took the reins and kind of scaled it up to something meaningful across the board. I really appreciate that. I think, one of my questions, especially around the orientation with education, is sometimes when I've been working on things like digital platforms for education, I find that the orientation can kind of sometimes be oriented around efficiency and, just like procedural kind of transactional experiences, like worksheets, tick this off, even with things like history, where it's like, it's presented in an abstract way that just feels like it really dehumanizes it. And so I'm curious about, like, from a broader lens, how do you think those in the education practice can learn from what you're doing, not just with IWalk, but just with the Shoah Foundation in terms of education in general?
I think that's a really important question. what I really love about the work that we do is placing the human experience at the center. Because when you start with that as your foundation, all of that procedural stuff, which you know needs to be there, teachers need the scaffolding, students need the structure, they need to be able to say, okay, yes, I'm done, I did that thing. But if you keep the learning outcomes at the core of what you're trying to do, and always whenever you're making those decisions around the procedural, if you can map it back to what are we really trying to achieve? How are we trying to change students' behaviors? How are we trying to engage teachers and inspire them to do something different in their classroom that can get students thinking critically about the world around them, that can get the students interrogating media and trying to understand what it is that they're learning, not just learning for learning's sake. I think that's where you start to get to the best of education, is when we can get those student, teachers inspired to take on something new, and then the students really engaged in thinking very deeply about what it is that they're doing. And I think you need those pieces to be able to get there.
Yeah, that's so true. It just feels like it's a way for really making, like, that personal piece just makes it super relevant for students, right? Like putting yourself in the shoes of somebody who's experienced these events resonates in a way that isn't just like, okay, this happened and this happened and this happened. Okay, that's what you have on your history test. I was watching one of the testimonials the other day, and I think it was on the Danube River one, and the woman was saying, the survivor, she was saying, yeah, we were being forced to walk in the middle of the winter, and we were naked, and they wouldn't let us talk. And I mean, they were going to kill us anyway, but they wouldn't let us talk. Like, it's like that one, it's like that one moment of like, yeah, these things that happened are so outside of, like, my normal experience, the day to day. But this idea of like, they wouldn't even let us talk, like, that she was horrified about that thing, and that detail came through, was so important and kind of like resonating on that personal level. Also so amazing about the testimonies. I'm curious about, okay, so now we're in this pandemic, right? where we're both stuck in our homes, as is everybody else, and our many students. And, we have this experience that is really oriented around place. How do you feel like we can resolve? I think one great thing about IWalk is that you can experience these places without going to them. How can we learn from what's happening right now and be able to give these experiences, even if you can't travel to certain places that are part of history like this?
Yeah, it's one of those moments where you're kind of like, oh, we have the app out there. It's all about location based. Get out there, and say, oh, we can't go anywhere. We can't leave our house. But you're absolutely right. Sometimes when you're cooped up at home, what better way to escape the crazy reality that we're in than to go and have a virtual exploration of a space that you never thought that you would want to go or need to go or get to go. For teachers and students, they're looking to explore the world in so many different ways, and it may not be physically anymore, but the iWalks, the way we've developed them for for iPhone and Android, but also the way we're starting to think about, okay, there's certainly a virtual opportunity to think of maybe a desktop version as actually something that would be a great complement, that we still need and want to be able to have that handheld. You can go anywhere, you can take these stories with you. But teachers we're always speaking to, what you shared earlier, being responsive to your audience and what teachers are needing. That's been something we've been talking about a lot, and wanting to make sure that virtual exploration is just as effective as we know the in-person, on the ground experience is. So that's something that we've been working on and hoping to explore more.
Yeah, that's great. It's really a moment for that, since I mean, you can only be interested in the room that you're in so much. So
That is
I'm happy to be able to explore new places virtually. Just a housekeeping thing. If you all have questions, please feel free to put it in the Q&A, and then Sarah will kind of be collecting them and helping us go through them at the end of our discussion. So kind of thinking about, not just virtual experiences, having worked on something like IWalk, I'm curious, like, are there good ways that we can create better access and education, kind of make these experiences for all students, even if they don't necessarily have all the opportunities of the most privileged students?
Yeah, that was one of the things for us was really important when we were thinking about, we talked a lot with your team around access in so many different ways. We were talking about kind of, can we make sure that the fonts can be scaled up and down to accommodate anybody's eyeglass prescription levels? And you're going to be in an outdoor space, and sometimes it could be really bright, and then other times you could be in a very busy urban space with lots of noise. So we wanted to, really make sure we were thoughtful about those elements when we were doing the first round of building the app, and making sure that that infrastructure was really solid and thoughtful. We really wanted to ensure also, we know students have different levels of access to technology. And so wanting to try to make sure that what we were building would be able to be flexible enough that if you have the fanciest of iPhone 37s or whatever we're at now, or a very basic phone, that you're going to be able to have the same rich experience. We certainly know that streaming is challenging even on a good day, especially now as we're all at home and fighting over the shared Wi-Fi in our living rooms. One of the great things that your team helped us conceive of and get to was the idea of, what, parents are not going to be thrilled if their kids are out with their class and running through all of the data feed or data levels when they're out on a field trip. So one element of the app, which was just a very a small, well, I think it was a small technical thing. I'm sure your team is like, we put in a lot of time and effort into it, but being able for teachers in the classroom, okay, everybody get out your phone, we're going to download the app for the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Plaza, and now we're going to, this afternoon we're going on the field trip and we're going to go there. So then when the kids were out of the classroom and away from school Wi-Fi, they could turn off, they could go to, airplane mode without draining all of the, the precious family data plan, and still be able to have the full experience and listen to the testimonies and be on location and explore, these sites of memory, and these memorials, and to be able to layer in that, the context that is often missing either in a site of memory or at a memorial, where you are interacting with some sort of artwork or a some sort of exhibition, but you don't necessarily have the human experience layered in. And so wanting to bring that to students in a way that wasn't going to overwhelm, wasn't going to drain that data, was really important. Those were some of those elements, I think, and ensuring that we had the ability to scale the experience, because we certainly know that teachers from middle school to high school would be using these resources, and there's different reading levels, and needing to be able to offer tools to educators. Some students can read on screen very easily. It comes second nature to most of the students now, but not everybody. And some are auditory learners, and they need to be able to hear it to really digest it. So sometimes there's, you know, text on screen, and then being able to add new features, like we've done recently, to be able to have, you know, an audio element to the tour as well as the testimonies. So having that flexibility in the app was really important and really amazing for your team to help us figure out how we could get there, because I think we probably said flexibility and accessibility so many times in the first, you know, 2 or 3 weeks of the engagement. It started to feel like, oh, there goes Jenna again talking about flexibility and accessibility. You know, it just becomes kind of an annoying phrase, but it was so essential for us to be able to think about and keep that all those different elements in mind.
Yeah, and you had a great team, because to them that's second nature to be thinking about just inclusive practices as well as accessibility. So I'm sure they weren't annoyed with your focus on flexibility and accessibility, because it's top of mind for them too. And I also, it's interesting, I hadn't thought about this angle before, but I think that's what made the collaboration really strong. Is you're from an organization that is focused on human-centered stories. We're an organization that's focused on human-centered design and development. And so kind of thinking about those things that may seem little, like not using all the data and downloading content in advance, it's super important to really creating great experiences that are meaningful, because those seemingly little things can be huge barriers for people.
Lowering the access was so important.
Yeah. And I also appreciate things like thinking carefully about font size and that type of thing, because you don't know it's a problem unless you're in a category that struggles with that, and making it super accessible is just like, is so important to widening your audience. So, you know, just kind of thinking about thoughtful development in tech. You know, I have a lot of criticism about the tech industry, and oftentimes the philosophies that that are just kind of inherently incorporated into the approach to design and development. There's this quote I think about a lot because it's so horrendous. And so I'm going to read it to you, and I'm just curious about what we can learn from it. So it's super startling, and it's from this technologist called Anthony Levendowski. He's a former Google exec. By the way, he was like, I think he was sentenced the other day for some sort of crime. But that said, he said, the only thing that matters is the future. I don't even know why we study history. I guess the dinosaurs and the Neanderthals and Industrial Revolution and stuff like that, but what already happened doesn't really matter. You don't need to know that history to build on what they made. In technology, all that matters is tomorrow. And it sounds really startling to hear that, but I feel like sometimes there is this kind of hubris and arrogance, especially as we're working on emerging technologies and things that are oriented, towards the future. How can we as designers and technologists learn from what you do to fight this arrogance and better incorporate history in our work?
I mean, wow. That quote.
Yeah.
I think when you sit down and you start listening to somebody else, like Conrad was saying, you need to stop and you need to listen. It's not necessarily, I think there's so many survivors in our archive who talk about, most of our testimonies were collected between 94 and 2000. Thinking of what was happening in 1994 in Rwanda at the time we started collecting testimonies and survivors talking about, Holocaust survivors talking about their experiences from decades earlier, reflect on what have we learned? Have we learned anything? Listen to my story. What am I watching on the news right now? How can we learn? But I think ultimately, when you listen to the stories of others, the shared human experience that is articulated in, this archive of testimonies, you start to see that. And when we're thinking about education, we're thinking about our students, so much of what is important is about, from our perspective and our lens, is about building empathy and building understanding, and how we can connect together as human beings to make this world better, not necessarily just by building, new, innovating, which is important in and of itself, but how can we do that in a way that is taking into account the humanity of one another. And it's certainly a challenging thing to do. It's much more challenging to do it in, a traditional, I think, history textbook type environment. And when you stop and you listen to someone else's story, all of our research shows and others that you make a connection, a personal connection to what you're listening to. I think it was our founder, Mr. Spielberg, who has said, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. I hope I'm not misquoting him or stealing a quote from somebody else involved in our organization, but I love that notion that these individuals were sharing their story with us. And now all of these students are taking that message with them into the future. And I think as we face some very startling and not so startling challenges about our current landscape and the ways in which we treat each other, we need more empathy, we need more understanding, and as Conrad Ruud said, we need more respect to be able to have respectful dialogue, to be able to really make this make this world a better place for our children. Like, I'm gonna start busting into song right now, but it's there's a lot of scary things in the news, and how can we oh, good. Someone wrote in the quote, Elie Wiesel, when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. Thank you. I think that's absolutely right. And I think our founder has quoted Elie Wiesel, so that's probably, I've heard him saying it, but through the lens of Elie Wiesel. So it's a interesting time and an important time to be having these conversations.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And that's such a great quote. And just the orientation around listening, because if you just kind of think about this moment we're in and a lot of the conflict and polarization, it's real, like, we're not listening. We've stopped listening. So I think in a moment, we're going to share a little kind of recorded demo of some of the new, what can we look forward to, Jenna, with the update for IWalk? Let's talk about that a little bit. By the way, you can download IWalk and use it on your phone, which is so incredible. There's a version of it out that's now. So tell us a little bit more about what's going on with it now.
Yeah, when we launched the app, if you search Android store or Apple store, I think USC Shoah, SHOAH, IWalk, IWALK, all one word, that should get you to it right up at the top. I think that was the shortest way I could type it in and get you quickly there. When we launched it back in spring of last year, I think spring 2019, we launched it with 30 different IWalks in 7 different countries and 8 languages. So we have been working since we had those early prototype ideas and really trying to expand to reflect the breadth in the collection that we have in our archive. Since then, over the last 6 to 8 months or so, our team got back together. We brought the team back together with Substantial to think about what the next phase. So one project my colleagues in our immersive technologies department at the Shoah Foundation were working on is 360 capture. Testimonies on location using 360 cameras. We wanted to travel with survivors to significant places in their story and capture that in a different format than what we traditionally had. So those 55,000 testimonies I talked about are traditional testimonies. Survivors are sitting in their living room most of the time and sharing their story. So it was a very different experience to be able to have survivors in these spaces. And then we really wanted to be able to find really creative ways to use that that footage, one of which was we got to get these into the IWalk app. So that meant we needed all sorts of new bells and whistles for the app to be able to accept 360 footage and render it. I'm probably not using all the terms, but really wanting to make sure that teachers and students could experience that. And for the virtual environment that we are finding ourselves in, it certainly is taking it to that next level to be able to, you know, move your phone around and really explore the spaces in a number of places. So that's one of the new features. I think you have a snippet of that in the demo, I'm hoping.
We do. So I think that's a good segue. Sarah is going to share her screen, and yeah, we'll take a look at some of these new features.
A perfect segue into the demo. Here we go.
The first feature that we wanted to demo for you all today is the offline experience while using the IWalk app. So you'll see here, this is the standard landing page with a list of all the countries with available IWalks. Now, if I go into airplane mode and turn off my service, I'm presented with a different screen where only my downloaded IWalks are available for me to use. And I have a few here that I've previously downloaded, and opening one up, I still have access to all of the same information that I would before, everything that I need to walk through and complete this IWalk. So if I open this one up, I still have all of the content, can watch videos, can see key terms, really anything that I would need to do to complete this IWalk. Now if I turn my service back on and also switch over to our beta app to show you two new features that are really cool and exciting. So the first one is the integration of immersive 360-degree videos. This allows users to get the experience of the site of memory whether they're there or not. So this one, I'm going to just pull up the stop with the 360-degree video, and as I play the video, I'll pan my phone around so you can kind of get a feel for the experience.
I'm Tibor Eisen, known as Max Eisen. I came to these gates, in front of these gates, in early May of 1944. This gate was actually a fortress guarded by many SS units. This was the entrance to Auschwitz I.
So you'll see as I move around, you're able to see everything as if you were in the site itself. Now the other feature that we wanted to demo for you is called text-to-speech. This is where users are able to listen to the content of a stop versus having their nose buried in the app as they're reading through the content. So you'll see in this one, when I open it up, I have this listen to this segment option here that opens a new menu that floats so I can keep scrolling through and keep playing around within the IWalk. But if I play, you'll be able to hear some of the content read to you.
The 6 Pillars, Part 1. 6 rectangular pillars, in memory of the 6 million Jews killed by Nazi Germany and its collaborators, sit on one side of the plaza.
So, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say a moment of silence here. Go ahead, Sheryl.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting seeing that, especially given, you know, some of the things we were talking about earlier, which is like, it's really hard to go to these sites now. So being able to experience them virtually in such an immersive way, it just seems really, really great, especially given our current times. I think what we can do is we can take a look at some of the questions that people, thank you for asking questions in the Q&A format. Feel free to keep adding. Let's see. There's a couple that are kind of related about teachers. How do you imagine teachers using this platform during these periods of remote learning? And does the experience of place come through on the app without being in the space? I think we saw some of that.
Yeah, I think the as we start to roll out the 360 content, it helps heighten that experience even more. But even without that, in a number of the existing IWalks, there's this really powerful one in Prague that last summer I was with a group of students, and we had our I brand new at the time IWalk app, and we didn't have any of the 360 footage, but just listening to testimonies, standing in these, it was a space of deportation, kind of gathering area before individuals were deported out of the city. Matching that with historical photographs. That's one of the other great things about the app. So we obviously have talked a lot about testimony and how core that is to what we offer, but bringing that and layering in with historical images, being able to kind of hold your phone up and be like, oh, what's here now that definitely was not there in 1942 when this photograph was taken, and being able to look at space and interrogate it through the lens of kind of the past and the present, and using images in that way, you start to get a sense of that place. We also have images of mostly current, taken in the last couple of years as we were building out this content. So I think you do get a very robust experience, even if you aren't standing in Budapest or Prague or Philadelphia. You still get some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that just kind of going through the app and listening to the testimonies, even without the context of place, it's so moving. One question that somebody had here is, how are you getting this resource into the hands of teachers? It's fantastic.
Wonderful, thank you. We think so too. We do a lot of amazing professional development for teachers through Shoah Foundation, through other organizations that we partner with. All of these resources are free, so they, just trying to get the word out, participating in conferences. We have an amazing partnership with Discovery Education, which is one of the largest digital resource providers in the States. They're in 50% of US schools. And so trying to, through partnership, through participation in our professional development programs, but also those that others are hosting, really trying to get the resources out that way, because it's we really try to support teachers and make sure that no matter where they're at in terms of levels of tech comfort, that they feel that they can take on something new, whether it's teaching online, which now teachers are becoming rock stars at in the face of necessity, or through our apps. So it's it's a mixed bag, and we're always looking for other opportunities. So please feel free to reach out if you have other ideas.
Great. And then kind of speaking of teachers, can you share more about how you did user research with teachers and students? Did you interview teachers or students to help guide the design?
Yeah, we did. So we have an evaluation team at the Shoah Foundation that helps us do a lot of our user testing and work around that. So we've done a combination of pre and post surveys, so wanting to understand what teachers and students know before they engage with our resources, and then again after they've had an engagement, so we can start to track that, the changes in understanding, changes in behavior in terms of how they answer certain questions about how they might rate themselves on various levels of understanding. We also do in-depth interviews with smaller groups. We've often done pilots with specific schools, trying to hear from teachers at public schools, private schools, charter schools, trying to get kind of a wide variety of experiences, so we know that we are hearing from getting a really good sample size, or a sample of the population, to understand what they're looking at and what their challenges are in the classroom. And focus groups is the other element. So oftentimes when we'll do a pilot with a particular school, after they do the pre and post surveys, we also will sit down and do a debrief focus group experience through our evaluation team.
So the answer is robust user research with teachers and students.
I could have just said that, couldn't I?
No, the detail was perfect. But yeah, a lot of work to make sure to validate it with those who are the audience, and so that's great, and it's a tenet of good design. So one question was, how do you collect testimony for the app? I'm sure many of these testimonies predate the development of the app, and how did you sort and curate these experiences to align with space and location?
That's a really good question. So as I mentioned, we have 55,000. The first 52,000 were collected in those the first decade of our organization's history, but we haven't stopped collecting. So when we go and look in our archive, the testimonies are indexed and digitized. And so through that indexing process, we're able to type in a search term. If we are curating an IWalk and we really want to focus on the liberation experience, we can type in liberation into our visual history archive, and then it will filter down to, 54,000, because most people were talking about some element of liberation. But if we really wanted to focus on a particular location, we can then say, I want to hear from everybody who was born in Budapest. And now I also want to filter it even further by anybody who gave their testimony in the United States or Australia or the UK, and make sure that we have an experience that if we're curating an IWalk for students in the States, you want to make sure that the testimonies are going to be very clear, and the accents are either clearly understood, or that we have resources to be able to close caption and make sure that it's all very clear and understandable for the student audience. So we have a lot of, I guess I also could have said, I have robust tools to do that as well. So that's how we start our search, is we start with the 55,000, and then we have research questions. What is it that we're trying to tell? What is the story of this particular place? And my amazing colleagues, you kind of say, it would be great to talk about this moment in history, and these, it would be great to have experiences from these types of people. And usually within, a day and a half, they're like, oh, here you go. Here's 10 great testimonies. Have at it. We are also still collecting new testimonies. So in the case of the 360 collection, we're starting to build that out further. We also are doing our first remote capture testimonies in time of COVID. And how can we continue to take testimonies? We have our last chance collection for so many of the Holocaust survivors in particular, that this is our last chance to be able to capture their story, to tell their story. So still doing that and bringing those testimonies into the larger archive that then our education team can look through and really find the needle in the haystack of so many powerful stories, but really finding one that meets the learning outcomes that we're trying to achieve with a particular IWalk, because you always want to keep that at the center of what you're trying to achieve and offer for teachers and students.
Yeah, that's super. Yeah, that's super interesting. I hadn't actually thought about the kind of like the narrowing down of experiences that, are really the right fit for some of the, for your objectives within the app. It's kind of related to that. How did you decide on the locations that you first featured?
So I've talked a lot about Budapest. That was where this idea originated, and it grew from there. We have partnerships with other organizations in a number of different locations. We also have so much robust content in a lot of these places. So it was, very clear that, Babi Yar in Ukraine would be, there's so much testimony in the archive about that experience. And for students and teachers in Ukraine, that becomes part of their, that's their part of their classroom, history lesson oftentimes could be a visit to Babi Yar. and it often grows out of necessity and partnership. What we're hearing from teachers in these locations where we have such a need, and where, do we have resources to support educating about this place. We also, in the case of, mentioned Philadelphia a couple of times, last year, or maybe it's even been almost 2 years now, in 2018, I believe it was, in October, the Philadelphia Holocaust Remembrance Plaza opened to the public. It was completely renovated. There's a beautiful sculpture that had been in Philadelphia, in Center City since the 1960s. And it was just kind of its own memorial, just kind of sitting there. And over many years and lots of really thoughtful hard work, an amazing organization really built up an entire memorial space around this one sculpture. And it was always very important to them to be able to bring in that human story, but it's an outdoor plaza in Philadelphia. You can't have screens and maintain and all of that. So there's really powerful elements built into the space of the plaza. Train tracks that were taken from Europe I believe on the line that led to Treblinka, one of the death camps. There's this beautiful tree that was taken from a sapling in Theresienstadt, which was a concentration camp outside of Prague. And so there's these elements, and there's so many stories in the archive that can help bring these physical elements in a memorial space to life, and layer in the missing spatial context. You're in Philadelphia, you're not in Terezin, but you can start to understand how these spaces can help your understanding of these moments in time. So oftentimes it's a great partnership, a great need from educators in a particular space, and layering that with, do we have content that helps enrich a space? And when all of that comes together, it's kind of that magic synergy that happens.
Great. Yeah, and it's amazing, just like focusing on one place and kind of looking at the testimonies and this, just like the collective story it tells is it's just such an immersive experience. There's a question here, and I don't know if there are any initiatives with Shoah Foundation. How can we create something like this for younger students, critical age, to develop empathy skills? Is the Shoah Foundation?
Is that a plant question? That could be a plant question. I'm a little skeptical. Actually, we really do. Early next year, we'll be releasing a whole suite of resources for primary education through eyewitness.usc.edu. We currently have a good group of primary education resources. We have a beautiful VR animated short that tells, that brings to life the story of Roman Kent and his experience in the Lodz ghetto and their family pet, Lala, the dog. So there's some really great resources on Eyewitness. If I can quickly manage, I will add in the chat window the links. All panelists and attendees. Okay, I can talk and type at the same time. Let's see. So Lala is a great resource that we piloted it with. Oh, wonderful! My colleague Greg put in the full link to our 360 animated short Lala.
Oh, nice.
So we piloted that lesson with first graders. So that is the earliest that we've started to explore how the testimonies and elements of the testimonies are not about, you're not teaching the entire history of the Holocaust to first graders, obviously, but you're using the power of one person's story to get students thinking about how we treat others. Come visit, stay in touch with Shoah Foundation, because come January, there will be a lot new primary education resources coming your way.
That is incredible. And I thank you, Gregory, for sharing the link. I'm definitely going to be sharing it with my 8-year-old. Lala. Can't wait for that. Thank you so much, Jenna. We're almost at time. This has been great talking to you and about the amazing work that USC Shoah Foundation is doing. I encourage everyone to download IWalk and take a look at it, and also go to the USC Shoah Foundation's website, because there's so many resources, so much testimony, and just you can kind of get a taste of all of the interesting and important work that they're doing. Oh, and thank you for doing the App Store search.
Trying. Thank you, and it was a pleasure to be here with you today, and we were just so thrilled to work with your team, Sheryl, Sarah. You guys are great, being able to take these ideas that we have kind of floating around of how we can really take the testimonies and make an impact in the world and help bring that to life.
Yeah, and that project has brought our whole organization joy. So we're so happy to be a part of it. Thanks everyone for attending, and I don't know if there are. Sorry for not answering all the questions, but yeah, we appreciate you attending, and this will be recorded, I believe, Sarah, and we'll share it out later, especially for those of you who had RSVP'd to the invite.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.